Clint.
Colette.
How's it going?
Good. It's Monday, so some fun and stressful stuff, but all together, got to ski this weekend.
Yay.
Had a nice time. Got to play some hockey. That's always my happy place. So back into the salt mines I go. How about you?
Yeah. I'm still in the weekend salt mines of minding my children because it was a snow day here for the second day in a row. Last Friday was a cold day because it was minus 20 Fahrenheit with the wind chill. And once it goes below that, they cancel all the things, all the public school. And then Elvis was actually out sick with the flu before that. So I basically had a kid home for like the last almost week. So yeah, hopefully they're back tomorrow. We'll see. It's also supposed to be cold tomorrow. So, but yeah, we survived the storm. It wasn't that stormy in Michigan. Everybody else got like way more snow than us.
Weird.
Which is not, it's usually not like that. Usually we get a lot. So
you get that lake effect snow.
Yeah. And I have glasses, which I am very excited about.
I like your
which
glasses,
also,
by the way.
Thanks. So I'm, this is they had not come in when we recorded the rest of this episode. So you will see we don't have whatever the movies hire when it's like a continuity person that like minds the like,
terrible.
This is what you're wearing and this is what we don't have that. So everybody just gets to see me with glasses and then magically without glasses. In a little bit.
We'll add it to the budget request for next season.
Maybe we could AI out my glasses. Yeah.
I mean, that would be apropos. Yeah, for this episode.
Exactly.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
So we invited some people to come chat after Dr. Dave Woods was on the podcast talking and introducing the Messy Nine. We had quite an interesting reaction and kind of set of feedback on that episode. And Dave himself was like, really should get people to like talk about their work and how this applies. And I said, I agree. And I did want to like mention that like we put out a call. I did a little bit of like hunting around and asking around and then trying to invite people to talk to us about how they're using AI. And my requirements were you're using it to like do your work. So it's not like you're using it just to like write an email, but like you're using it to code, you're using it to doing work is writing emails. But like I wanted a little bit more in the nitty gritty of the operator universe, right? And I did not get that many responses.
I was really surprised.
I don't know if it's that people don't want to be on the podcast. They just don't want to talk about it. Maybe they're worried about like work NDA stuff. I don't know. But I was surprised actually at how few people were like coming forward and saying like, yeah, I use this every day basically to like do my work. Do you think like, I'm curious, like, do you have that experience at work where you're like, because I know you were talking about how you use it. Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Feel like you use it more or less than other people at work?
I think that question itself, we saw in our conversation just between Martin, myself, and Sheeri, very different versions of what we're doing with it and how it's affecting us and how we feel about it. Mm-hmm. And it can be really easy as an engineer. You have a very complicated job. You have to edit how you talk to every other engineer. Like it's just part of the job. Is like, what kind of engineering do you do is actually a pretty like violent question, right? Like, and then it's like, I don't know enough about you to know how much I'm going to say with us and have this be a productive conversation, right? So it takes a while, and we were sussing that out even, and we know Martin well, and I sort of know Sheeri, but it's still like, oh, I do this, I do that. So even at work, it's the same. And no, I find that when I talk to people about the use of AI, we're all a little cagey about what we're doing with it. And because it doesn't feel like, I think it's adjusting how we feel about our work. Like, I'm proud of the stuff I've produced. I'm proud of the work I do. And can I feel proud about the work I did with AI? Is an
Mm.
open question for me. Like, I want to. I think I should. It's just a tool. But because it's got this anthropomorphization on of it, like it's my little agent buddy. Did I do the work? So maybe that's affecting it. We didn't, we were so wrapped up in all the details of what we were talking about. This has been thing on my mind since we had that conversation. It's like,
Yeah, we didn't just
it is
delve into
weird.
the psychology of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
Which
like
is interesting
how it
because we had
affects.
Dr. Woods here.
Yeah. Well, and it's like the other thing of like, they make that joke of like, oh no, I make artisanal code now. And it's like, but I do think there is that like, do you make small batch artisanal code or do you make industrialized, Claude
Yeah, just Claude code
cranked
stamped out
Yeah.
functions. Yeah. I think that is a feeling we're all going through. And it probably echoes the feeling of the machine shop worker in, the 1950s, 60s, 70s of like, yeah, I still make cars, but I don't like make cars.
But so much is automated. Yeah. But people do still make cars, They do. I think that's a really interesting, but I also think, and like this, I was thinking a lot. I don't even remember if we talked about this during the conversation or if it will make it through the edit. But, but there's a really interesting interview with Ben Affleck that's been kind of going around the internet about AI and art and like filmmaking in particular. Yeah. And his whole shtick is basically like, look, craft is knowing how to start, and art and taste is knowing how to stop. And AI, he asserts he does not, from how he sees that LLMs have been made, how they've been developed, how they've progressed. He does not see a world where they can do the latter, right? Where they can enter into art. And I do think there is this sort of very interesting tension of like, as a software engineer, are you more like a plumber or as you mentioned, like a assembly line worker, or are you an artist? And like how much, where does software engineering fit in that world? And I think that's a very interesting question.
And it's challenging us to ask ourselves that too, because we may not have even had to really think about it. Like, you get a job, you find this interesting, you do it, you find it more interesting, you get more interesting work when you get promoted. Like that, at no point does anybody say like, do you feel like this was up to your artistic standards as a coder? Right? You're, as a craftsman of code, like, but you do feel it in the back of your mind. You're like, this is crap. This is crap. Or this was really good. Like I got to really, put those chamfered edges onto this code. Right? But that conversation is out. And I totally agree with Ben Affleck, by the way. I had somebody generate a script for us recently, actually as part of an incident response. And the thing just added emojis and log lines that were necessary. And it just overdid so much. And it did it quickly. And actually, it was right. Like the code was helpful. It definitely solved the problem. But we were all kind of laughing. Like we're in an incident response. We're watching a script run. And we're like, somebody's like, AI did the emojis, right? Like we didn't do that. And we're like, yeah, it's just, it's showing off. But it's like, junior engineers do that stuff too. They don't really know how to like stop it. They're just like more and more and more and more. And I agree, learning the effects of not stopping is actually part of becoming a more senior and more mature person in general. So yeah, it is, I think it is on our minds, all of this. And the lack of response is part of the episode. I think you're right. We didn't really talk about it, but I was surprised by it too. But on reflection, I'm not, because I don't get much response at work either, because we just don't want to talk about it.
It's so weird to me because there's so much hype around it, but it is very, very hard to get people to talk very explicitly about how they're using it and how they are thinking about and approaching things. So I All right. So, without further ado, I'm going to read the bios of the very wonderful people who did reach out and participate with us. I'm so grateful for them. So, Martin Smith is a principal architect, SRE at NVIDIA's DGX Cloud, where he drives reliability between engineering teams and cloud service providers. Sheeri Cabral is a seasoned leader who has navigated technical landscapes at MongoDB, Salesforce, and Mozilla. She studied AI in the era of robot football and Furbies, back when a transformer meant Megatron or Optimus Prime. In her current position as Director of Enterprise Architecture at MyKarma, she uses AI to help develop personal scripts and remind her of what she actually does know. And then, of course, we have back on the podcast John Allspaw. At this point, I'm just going to read the very abbreviated version of John's bio because he's just been on so many times. You all know him. John served as CTO at Etsy and holds an MSc in Human Factors and System Safety from Lund University. He's a principal at Adaptive Capacity Labs. And Dr. David Woods rejoins us. He founded Resilience Engineering as an approach to safety in complex systems in 2000 to 2003 as part of the response to several NASA accidents. He is currently a professor, I think emeritus, at the Ohio State University in the Department of Integrated Systems Engineering, with pioneering research on the interaction between humans and technology and risk-critical activities for almost 40 years. His books on safety and resilience engineering include Resilience Engineering Concepts and Precepts, Behind Human Error, and Resilience Engineering in Practice. We're so excited to have everybody on this panel with us talking about AI, software, and the Messy Nine.
We all know people who are, in one way or another, using AI to code. We're hearing stories, we're interacting with them, we're seeing results. The issue is it is an enormously diverse set of experiences. And then they're all, not only are they using it in different ways, in different contexts, and for different forcing functions, they are also then trying to analyze what they do. So we're into this mass of folk model kind of exploration of technology change and its impact on cognitive work, systems, etc. And this is where cognitive systems engineering has a bunch of ways and techniques that you move through these to get what's the value, what's the ore that you can mine and then refine from these experiences. Not that these experiences are invalid, right? But people interpreting their experiences, right, is what people do, right? There's no such thing as a cognitive vacuum. We have to explain what we deal with, especially when it's new and producing change, not only what we do, but what happens around us. So, in some ways, that was my comment that, we're in a sense collecting observations, analyzing and interpreting them in real time in this session.
I think what might help us keep it scoped, right, is to first hear from each panelist, and maybe we can do a back and forth sort of discussion, questioning with each person. But how are you actually using different AI tooling in your work, in your day-to-day work, to produce and troubleshoot code? Honestly, also to produce and troubleshoot documentation. I think that's also a fair conversation to have, but I think I might slightly be more interested in code or operations more explicitly, and then we can go from there. Does that sound like an okay way to? Because if we
great.
always come back to ground it in the this is your experience, and then we kind of can, and I'll bring us back to experiences when I feel like we've gone afield too much.
Well, this is the classic way, you can channel Richard for a second here and think of how he would look and lean in right now and his voice, and he would say a variant on Martin. would you tell me your story? As you are, as you're working, what's tell me what captures your story, where you are, what you're doing, and what you're struggling with.
Yeah. I think for me, like the writing code with AI tools, like I think I started by asking it questions about code bases that I already had in front of me to sort of like get a sense of what it could do, what it could tell me. And then it sort of progressed into anytime, I think as like a operations person or an SRE, or often you have like a million times in a day where you go like, oh, I could write a script for that. And then you go like, oh, is it worth it? Like maybe if I do it 3 times, I'll write the script, or maybe, that sort of thing. And so then it for me switched to, oh, it's really easy to do that step now. It's also like really easy to get it wrong. And so I probably spend more time than I used to, instead of, oh, I could write a script for that. Is it worth it? Going, oh, is a script for that like generated by Claude or something like that going to be like useful, or is it going to be something that I want to maintain if I do it? Like, or is it something I want to throw away and answer once? Because the question of like, is writing the code worth the time is not as much of the question that I ask myself now. It's more like, oh, if I write that code, like, will I keep it? Will I do something with it? Will I run it once and throw it away and never look at it again? And I think now I'm at the point where I probably use it the most still to do things I know how to do versus things I don't. So I think I'm in the phase of like, occasionally I'll feed one of these tools API docs and then see if I can get it to call an API without me understanding it. But that feels more 50-50 still these days, to where end up needing to go in and like give more specific instructions, or say call this API. But I certainly use it for things I know how to do already. Like occasionally I will say, like I was working on a project the other day where I was like, oh, this is really slow. I know what the algorithm to do this in parallel should look like. I just need to give enough of a hint of that to the tool to make it do the thing, and like shorten an 8-hour task to a 1-hour task. That's kind of where I am.
So, there's many clarifications. If we tell each of these stories, this brings up some things. So the first thing I want to ask everybody is to use something from the above the line, below the line that Richard Cook put together. And so you used the word tool to refer to Claude. Previously, one of us used the word tooling to refer to the AI algorithms that help you generate code. Maybe we should try to clarify a little bit and say, are the algorithms actually more like tooling, or do you think they actually have? Or what I heard you say, Martin, is you described how you took tooling, right, and started to use it as a tool in a larger context. If we go through the layering that the above the line, below the line, starts, right? It goes further now as the world continues to change since, 5 years ago. But that's what you just described. That's what you described to me. Is that what you feel like, Sheeri? Is that how are you using it related to this discussion?
So the way that I'm using it is similar to Martin. So as a longtime database administrator, I'm not using it to produce my code because I don't code. I'm not developing software. I'm developing scripts and helper tools and things like that. And so I have been using a lot more, first of all, to ask it things. I actually did, let's see, from 2019, it's probably about 5 years as a product manager for a while. So I kind of stepped out of the database world. I was a product manager for databases for MongoDB, and then for, data governance software. And then I came back to engineering. And so there's a lot of new versions of software that I don't know what the new features are. So sometimes I'll actually just ask an AI tool, for example, Gemini, how do I find all the slow queries in the slow query log table? Because I never use it. I always use the files, right? And it will, much like Martin said, tell me the things I know how to do. Like I know how to write a query, but it's like, what's the name of the table and what information does it have? And I can go searching for that myself. It's probably about the same speed because the tools will get things wrong sometimes, as opposed to, like, say, looking at a manual. Something like that is probably easier to look at the manual and figure it out, or a blog post. Other things I have found really valuable, like putting in an error message and saying, what do I do with this? And it is much like using the old Stack Overflow. I mean, it still exists, Stack Overflow, where it's like, maybe that's not the right answer you get the first time, and you kind of have to investigate a little bit. So I haven't found good luck with do this thing I don't know how to do, but I have found good luck with, I have this systems brain. I understand how systems work in general. I understand networking. I understand databases. I understand file systems. Explain why this error might be happening. And then it says something. I'm like, that sounds reasonable. Let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit and find out that, oh no, that's not it at all.
So can I comment? We've seen this before.
Why don't
we have seen this many times before, this story. And what happens in the time scope that you're talking about, and I want there's too bad we don't have visuals here as my hands go to grab time bundles. So you're talking over a particular time scope, right, at a particular layer, which is very interesting. Now, that is part of a larger time scope about the development and deployment, the accessibility of the tooling, and how it provides tools or can be turned into tools that allow you to do things in the larger context in which you do things relative to the other layers up of critical services and the layers of critical service infrastructures. Now, when this has happened before, right, the key thing when it first starts is what you both said. You already know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You have a know-how, right? You have experience, and that also gives you judgment, right? So all of the deep aspects when we use what are currently out of favor words like expertise, right? But not just simply. Interestingly, you also illustrated that it's not simply knowing about, right? Because it's like, I don't know about this detail. Can you get me this detail? Well, there's lots of ways we get details. And now that we have new routes to get details, okay, it's getting details, right? It's saying that very deliberately in this way, that all this hype about these tooling and tools. And you go, what is it getting me? What you just said is it details, minor things.
Yeah.
Right? Very at odds with the rhetoric. Now, what have we seen before is what happens when adaptation at a different scale, different layer goes on, right? And this was my reaction to Lauren Hochstein's latest blog post, which was great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did email him this, but he didn't cover the typical cross-layer adaptation, which is management cuts your experience, cuts the number of you who are doing the jobs that you do. So there's fewer of you, right? And the ones who are there have less experience as a set. Now you're into the messy nine of how adaptation to capability or beliefs about capability have led to constriction, congestion, right? Oversaturation, which now leads you to have to make choices. And so you start introducing lag. I focus on this because I don't have enough time to do this, right? So which one do I do first? Which one do I prioritize? So we start seeing the different components of the messy 9 come into play. And you also illustrate right off the bat, without us listing the messy 9, that it's about the interactions of these, right? As tempo plays a role.
Yeah, no, I also wanted to set some context here, which sounds to me like each of you are working not in what we would call a greenfield setting for software building, right? Where you're applying these tools or tooling to existing sets of code, some of which you may have written, some of which you may have not, some of which you may know about, some of which you may not, right? Like, we're talking to people who are working with things that have already been written in situations where there's probably multiple teams writing multiple different pieces of code, putting those things into production, and where things are shifting and changing, not of your own like cognizance every day, right? So you're not some omniscient overlord of code wherever you're at, where you know everything that's making it into production. The system that you're dealing with is complex and unknown to you at almost all times. Is that a fair statement to make?
No, I am the omniscient Lord.
You're the omniscient one. Okay, got it. All right, Clint, go ahead.
Clint, I want to make an adjustment, just a tiny modification to the prompt that Dave, that Martin and Sheeri responded to, which is, can you tell us, at least first, like a most recent that comes to mind, time when you used it, when you used a large language model, used a Claude or any of them to do something? Can you just tell us about that?
Yeah, I can give you so there's like little ones every day that actually it's being like inserted into my work, that it's even become hard to notice. This is what I find interesting. I'm a pretty, I think 5 years ago, I was like, I am a Google master. Like, I've mastered search term construction. That is a skill that was honed over decades. And Google has started just inserting a little AI answer into the top. Everybody's probably experienced it. You see it. And at first I was like completely like, I just skipped that. Like, whatever, that is probably garbage. And now I'm like kind of noticing, like, wait a second. So like, just, I can't give you a specific one there, but that is one that's every day, constant, and has been growing. And I've noticed that they add the little link. I still click the link. I still read the sources. I don't really trust it to summarize fully. But I'm like, am I on the right track? It actually helps with that. So that is a big thing, because I sit similar to Martin and Sheeri. I'm not writing the code, like you say. I'm helping a lot of other people get their code to production. And when it's in production, helping them make it better and make it more reliable and help them understand how it works. And so I need more help explaining things that are maybe not in front of me all the time. But I'm like, well, how does that actually, like, how does Rails, like we have a Rails monolith, how does Rails do URL routing? It's doing a better job than the Stack Overflow sifting that would take me 30 minutes. It's like, okay, in 3 minutes, I see that. And if I really want to know, it's got links to the details. So that is a day-to-day, all the time thing. I also have found
I need
that,
to ask
like,
you a question about that.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You mentioned AI summaries, and everybody mentioned that you were using AI to dig out information. There are some problematic aspects to AI summaries. And so I'd like any of you to comment on how you're using this. You also all mentioned the fact that there may be slop or things off a little, or even something big enough to say it's misleading or a mistake in what you get in reply. So how is this working again for all of you? Because you're saying I'm digging out stuff I need to know, and it can be facilitating, especially in time. But on the other hand, you've hinted at the slop, and there's some very strong, again, I've seen this before, and we have some rules about how to build joint systems of people and algorithms that are that tell us maybe some of the ways AI works and interfaces with you is probably not a very good way. So I'd like to hear more about this juxtaposition of helping but also injecting problems you have to notice.
Yeah, I can answer a little bit with mine, and then I want to pass to the other panelists. Because for me, this goes back before there was AI. There was just the internet telling you the wrong thing, and it was pretty good at that. And I see Martin and Sheeri like nodding, and you had to develop expertise on how to know that you could trust something. A very simple way. Well, this is from postgresql.org. Okay, that's the documentation that the people who wrote the code agreed to put on the website. That's like a trust model that I can at least say what's on this is an intention expressed by people close to, and who are experts in one aspect of the system, which is its creation, not necessarily its operation. But I can read that. That was a trust model that was developed over time. And so, but then you see, fancy database tips.com, like you're like, maybe that could have been early AI slop, or that might have just been somebody espousing things or selling things, right? You had to develop that trust model. So when AI brings you some stuff, the first thing we all did was go like, where did it get this? Right. And that's where I think Google probably responded to our behaviors very quickly and started adding those links. Like, look, this one comes from Postgres. This one comes from AWS. And that helps you to trust that it maybe the summary is still a little slop, but at least it was generated from text that maybe came from humans who knew what they were doing. I'm sure now we'll find out those were also generated, but that's kind of the model that I see them now trying to bring forward to us in this one particular AI usage, which is, I didn't ask for it. It just started happening.
Yeah. I love that, Clint. Humans can and do hallucinate as well. We take in information and we make conclusions that may or may not be scientifically accurate. For me, the great thing about AI is that it enables me not to have to think so much. But the bad part about AI is that it enables me not to have to think so much. So let me explain that a little bit. For me, AI, this whole Colette, I think you said in the beginning, like people are like, well, you have to have an opinion because it's going to be around forever, or what, or it's just a bubble or whatever. For me, I predict, I guess, that AI 10 years from now are going to be like cell phones are now, and very much like cell phones. My husband is a huge trivia buff, and there are times where I'll be like, oh, like who is that actor in that movie? And he'll like, oh, it's at the tip of my tongue. And I'll be like, oh, I'll just look it up. And he's like, no. Don't look at, like, don't tell me. I want to think, like he wants to think about it. And I've noticed just in general, and I hate to get into like ism theories, like capitalism and different theories other than capitalism, but like, we are not always in control of our thoughts of what we're thinking. And what I mean by that is I go to work, and for all those hours of day at work, I have to think about work. And then I also think about, family life and whatever. And then, like we all get our best thinking done in the shower, right? Now, I don't know about you. Sometimes I'll put on a podcast and listen to it in the shower, right? Now I'm thinking about what that podcast is telling me to think about, right? I mean, it's my interest.
Right.
But how often do I sit there and let my brain think the thoughts that it wants to think? And this, sorry, we'll get back to AI, right? Like AI enables me not to have to think, and I'm not making those neural pathways when I'm thinking, like, if I ask it, optimize this query, and it's like, oh yeah, you need an index on this. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like I can confirm that that's what I need. Or, oh no, you're not, I need that index to be sorted in ascending order, not descending order. You know what you're talking about. Like I've only done that little bit of thinking as opposed to making all of those. And I found myself reaching for AI and stopping myself going, wait, I know how to do this. Why am I not just turning on my brain and doing this? So I feel like I know 2 phone numbers besides my own right now. And I used to know everybody's phone number, right?
Yeah.
20 years ago, I knew everybody's phone number. And right now I know my husband's and my mom's, and that's it. Because they're the only people that really haven't changed it in 20 years and that I use it a lot. So
feel it.
that's how it is for me. And I forget what the original question was.
No, you got it right. You got it right. I want to hear what Martin has to say. I just want to point out that Sheeri, both you and Clint managed to make such cogent comments just now without you managed to not say the word that David pointed out earlier, which is judgment. And so the thing that I want to hear what Martin, what your add-on is to this, but one of the things that people, and not machines, actually, turns out there's a good amount of research on what makes large language models, what makes it difficult for them to notice what's absent. And I, except right in this situation, notice something that's absent. We have 3 incredibly experienced, incredibly tenured in the industry experts on the call here. What's absent are novices, and that might be telling.
Maybe a little bit of a contrasting opinion, or like maybe I use it a little differently, but I also find you're thinking about what the other folks here have said. I think I find myself realizing that there are things that I know that I like need to give. Like I find myself thinking a lot more about rules I give to language models to create code. And like a really silly example of this is like, oh, I'm gonna like do a real quick script to figure this thing out. And then I'm like, oh wait, I'm gonna change it a little bit. And I'm like, I don't write tests first, right? And then I'm like, oh, actually, probably should have written tests first because I'm about to modify this and it doesn't like I might break it, right? And so I find myself actually spending more time lately giving sort of like rules to the agents to say like, no, every time you modify a file, like run the tests, right? Or things that like I know to be true, but I don't consciously think about every time. But and that's like a really trivial example. But there are other ones like validating data or like you know testing that something is true as I'm doing a longer step process. And so I find myself noticing more and more like things that were like just habits I had formed around writing code or just things that I wasn't consciously doing every time. And for me, like one of the cool things about that is that I can also like encode more of those when I give something to someone else too, right? So I can give somebody who actually is a novice a script that I wrote that maybe they weren't capable of producing either because they didn't understand the domain model or they didn't understand how to write the code. And I could also encode a bunch of things I couldn't do before without it being a huge effort. Like I could say, by the way, like practice all these good habits with code, with hygiene when you produce this data that like double check that this adds up, right? That's something like I would do, but now I can generate code, tell the like LLM to do that extra step maybe, but I have to like sort of discover it as I go, if that makes sense. Like just sort of encoding more and more of the habits I take for granted, both in the instructions to the AI, but then also in the outputs sometimes too, to where I can actually give somebody who can't do this thing, I can encapsulate all of that into a script that does that thing and hand it to someone who doesn't understand any of this, which has been new and different.
As a secondary order, Martin, have you had to do that? So have you had to work with a more junior engineer, almost pairing through an LLM?
Yeah, I mean, I have like a lot of opportunities to sort of scale up, you know, the thing we use the word tools again, but like the things that I could develop as tools, I can now do the encapsulate like that into agents or like an MCP, like a model context protocol tool, and say like, here's something you couldn't do. Here's me that used an LLM to write an agent that can now do this for you. And by the way, it has all of my good habits in it. That sometimes that goes well. It doesn't always go well, but I find myself thinking more about how I can scale myself than I could before. Just like, you know,
so
if I could write an
yourself
agent,
as
tweak
a
these two
teacher.
things.
Yeah.
As a teacher, as like
as a
someone
teacher.
who understands the domain model, as maybe somebody who like reports that I can do that we haven't spent the time to write code to do. Now I can write the code, or I could just write the agent that can do it every time with some instructions for me on like how to do it safely. So I do in some ways think more about expertise than I used to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Make sure that that stays in the recording and the episode, because Martin, you took the words right out of my mouth, and I will have to say, before David, before you go with your next question, which almost certainly I will be fascinated by, and so I will forget what I wanted to put down for posterity here for the recording. What these descriptions, well, you've all given these descriptions. It made me think of Jamie Zawinski's quote. Jamie Zawinski, if you don't know, is a notorious, famous, notable engineer who worked at Netscape once, and he said, he wrote, "Some people, when confronted with a problem, will think, I know, I'll use regular expressions. Now they have two problems." And so I would like to change that to,
JWC.
I know, I know. When you're confronted with a problem, say, I know, I'll use a large language model. And now you have a lot more than two problems, but you have now you have a supervision challenge. And so the thing that I like is that that's what you're doing. And you're so good at it, all of you, that you can make a call as to whether or not you're even going to, there are some things that you won't even, you won't even consider consciously that you won't have the LLM do, because either it's not going to work or it's not worth the hassle, and you'll find some other way to do it. And Martin, what you just described, the without Colette, you asked for CSE, somewhat CSE framing. I'll just put here what I noticed. Without going into too much detail about externalization and reflection and elicitation, rubber ducking is a really pretty magical approach when it comes to software engineering. And the idea is you have this rubber duck and you explain a problem after you've been banging your head against the wall on this bug or whatever. And you explain the problem to the rubber duck, and the process of explaining can help you understand the problem better, because it's a different cognitive work to explain than it is to work on what's been explained. Except it's a little bit like LLMs, the way you describe it, Martin, is that the fact that it got you to reflect a couple of things that you otherwise would just done, quote unquote, muscle memory. Oh yeah, I do that. And the thing didn't know it. It's a little bit like slightly advanced rubber duck, and still had the same.
The duck talks back. I don't know if I love that.
Yeah. So anyway,
and follows your instructions literally too, which is not always what you meant either.
I love that though. I wish human beings would follow my instructions literally. It actually got to the point the other day where I was talking to people on a team trying to help me debug a networking issue, and I was like, I can't do this upgrade I'm trying to do. I was talking to someone from infrastructure, and they were kind of new on the team, and they were like, oh well, and I was like, I tried like pinging and it's not pinging out, and I can't get to the repository, and they were like, oh well, you should use a proxy for that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know if we have a proxy here. I'm asking if I'm on this VPC that needs a proxy. And they were like, oh well, you really should to figure out if that's gonna be. I'm like, yeah, that's why I put this message in this channel, was to get that exact help. And so then I pinged someone who I thought could help, and they were like, oh well, if you want to upgrade, here's how you upgrade, yum upgrade, blah blah blah. I'm like, oh yeah, I know. I'm like, am I talking to AI people here? Like what's going on here? Like that was why I was like I might be talking, like, is it me? Just people coming in with different amounts of context. And that's the thing about AI, is that it really, much like the rubber duck has no context.
Yeah.
So you have to give it all the context, right? I never used a rubber duck. I used posting a bug. Like I've started posting thousands of bugs that I never got to, because in explaining the problem in the bug, I'm like, oh, it's that, and went to go fix it. So that was my
great.
version of a
that's
rubber
my
duck.
brain. Yeah.
Right. Oh,
Yep.
yeah. I
Yeah.
never put A and B together, but when I had to write down A and then B, I realized, oh, yeah, there's the gap. And so it is useful in that rubber duck, right? But you always need the why behind it, and is this the problem we're trying to solve, and what are we doing here?
So let me ask everybody a simple question at the interval we're in of change, in a larger tempo of change, more than one, is who's in charge? In your stories, who's in charge? And how is that going to change? Who's in charge? I mean, in the stories you told, you were in charge.
Yeah.
Right? Now, how is that going to change? Right? As the evolution goes on in deploying, increasing the access, increasing the expectation, increasing the demand, pressures on you or people like you, so that you have to use AI algorithms more and more, where you no longer have the time, or it's someone else who doesn't have the history of experience and knowledge, or you now have to work in an area where your experience and knowledge doesn't fit anymore. Who's in charge?
I mean, that's a trick question, Dave.
Well, I
Sorry.
think I know what you're getting at, though, and I've talked about it a little bit. That there are some pressures to sort of show a causal relationship between our usage of AI and our increasing productivity. Like, there's definitely it's still veiled a little bit. It's sort of like, we gave you AI tools, celebrate. Now, where's your productivity? Like, how is it going? How much are you using it? And then there's this desire to correlate those two things. That once we see the usage go up, we're definitely going to see the productivity go up, and then the money will just roll in, right? That is the thing that's coming, and it feels right now like they're letting us figure it out. Like, I think that's what you're talking. We're in charge still, as very senior engineers. All of us are senior engineers. We're being still given business problems to solve, and these are more tools, and we're finding ways to deploy them. We're also finding ways that they're not useful, and trying to tell folks that, and trying to keep an open mind. But at some point, it does feel like that modicum of pressure right now that's coming from, we have to be, we can't get run over by the people who figure this out first. That's going to become greater and greater until, I don't know what, maybe an AI bubble pops, like, until it actually does work. I'm not sure, but that is one thing I do feel, is that I do have a little bit of anxiety over, will I still be in charge in 5 years?
But notice one of the things you said, until the money flows, right?
Yeah.
And then the money flows. Notice that line, which is part of the expectation at layers above, right? And part of the rhetoric, and what makes it a gold rush, right, is that money can only come from having less of you, or more of you with less experience.
Yeah.
Right? So less and less. There's no other way to get money. And you just all ran through how experience matters. And I started out by saying, I've seen this before. And what I've seen before is, de-skilling is a terrible word and label for the dynamic and pattern. But what we see is how we undermine, right, the ability to grow experience, to grow skill, to grow knowing how, to grow judgment. And how many times in different fields have I, it's called airmanship or seamanship. It's judgment. What's the equivalent of airmanship and seamanship in software engineering?
A mature software engineer.
You're going to need that word because you're going to have to argue that we are losing and we need to do things in order to recapture, reestablish, revalue, right? That's those sources of judgment, right? In the face of uncertainty, in the face of, oh, dare I say it, messiness that reemerges in various ways.
Yeah.
And so that point, and so we can come back to the who's in charge, because the guarantee is that you will be less and less be in charge for many, many reasons and factors. As this evolution continues, their expectation of making money is that you are less in charge, because if you're in charge, that costs them money, right? They don't want you to be in charge, and they think this mechanism, right, as we deploy it, right, puts you more in a box. And that box is, cheaper, faster, and in their imagination, better. Now,
You're speaking to my anxiety, Dave, but I have to respond with the way that I'm not like crumbling from the weight of all this anxiety is that I also feel like this isn't the first time where there's been a misunderstanding of my value to the companies that I work for. There's a new factor, there's a new sort of little bit of spice in this, in that this is definitely a big change in what's available. But it's also, as we all talk about all the time with the ironies of automation, it's creating all these new and interesting problems that people haven't fully figured out how to factor out. And they're causal thinking problems that seem to be right in my wheelhouse. And so inevitably, like, you hired more coders, great. You still need a good SRE to help them draw boundaries around their code and help them to shepherd it through to production and help them to deal with the scale that they've now created, and the induced demand that they've created, right? So that's kind of how I'm doing. I'm wondering actually how Martin and Sheeri are feeling too. Like, I was very worried early on. There was this like existential thing like you're describing, and it's kind of been tempered now with like, oh wow, that's a whole new class of problems that no one seems to have an answer for. Dive in. Yeah. So many interesting things, new expertise to build to replace that one that I've now de-skilled out of because, oh well, writing scripts was hard. Now it's not.
Clint, this is deja vu for you and me, right? Because the last time we talked, I pointed out that the Messy 9 is a guarantee, as you just said, directly, but the Messy 9 says fundamentally, foundationally, right? These problems, these forms of limits and challenges reappear. The messiness will reappear over cycles that aspire to improve systems. And that means these attributes that you demonstrate even right now in accommodating new tools, new tooling, which are evidence of those skills, right, will be valuable in the future. The problem is there are other layers in the system that are blind to it. So as I said to you last time, people like you will reemerge. All right. The problem is what happens to you. There may be a valley we have to go through before they reemerge. In other words, this is the story for the last 40 years of our work, which is people at higher layers, echelons, keep missing the things that make systems work, change the system, and then have to rediscover some of the missing ingredients that makes messy, complex systems work. And if we don't have to go through and repeat those cycles over and over again. We don't have to have people like me say, I've seen this before, and I've seen this several times before. I'm not going to be around that much longer to see these things, and I don't want my students to then mimic me, right, over and over again, saying, "Oh yeah, I've seen this before," and Dave told me all the times he'd seen it before. We don't have to keep repeating this. We are supposed to be learning agents, and the thing we keep want to learn is how to make make stuff free that isn't ever free. That's part of what the Messy 9 is supposed to remind you of. There, that's why literally one of the theorems is called no free lunch.
I'm
How much
curious.
more evocative can we get? There's fancy math, and then people attack the math because they don't like the idea that there's no free lunch. Because what are they selling? They are selling free lunches, which aren't free because you have to pay for these things.
I'm curious if any of you have had to troubleshoot an issue, bug, outage, something in production that was that was related to LLM generated code or like behavior. So like, have you experienced a situation, maybe it wasn't your code, maybe it was somebody else's code, but it was, have you yet experienced a situation where there's code that was generated in production and maybe there was like +1 on it or whatever, but like some kind of code review, but that it was generated by an LLM like knowingly, and that people like, how did that work? Did it feel different? Like, I'm really curious about that, if anybody's had any of that happen.
I haven't done it, but my company did have it. And there was definitely like our VP of engineering was like, we've hit a milestone, our first bug from AI generated code, right? That was reviewed by a human and tested by our regular pipelines and all that kind of stuff.
Was it celebrated?
It wasn't celebrated any more so than somebody's first, a maintenance where they messed something up and did it was celebrated. It's just like, this is, you've gotten the badge now.
Yeah.
Others, where like people used to copy other people's code by hand, and like now all of these tools are trained on a bunch of other people's code, and so it's not unlike people doing that in the past. It's now like, hey, go look at this code over here and write it for this other thing. Oh, it turns out that that's like not quite as simple as it looked. And I don't know that I've seen any that are like unique to these tools yet.
Martin, are you saying that vibe engineering has been around for a long time, longer than we've been calling it vibe engineering?
Yes, I think it's just more democratized than ever.
For as long as copy and paste has been a function.
So
like now that's just a copy and paste on another level.
I'm old enough to remember when people thought that Wikipedia was, full of slop and would, make people go down all the wrong paths, right? And this is, AI slop is not different from the Wikipedia slop. I mean, David, you asked who's in charge. And I think we've said it a few times, actually. You said it, and Clint actually said it in a few ways. The almighty dollar is and always has been in charge. We work in a software industry. We study in universities, and all of these depend on the fact that I am not outside in the 20 degrees Fahrenheit weather, right? Which is like -6 or 6.7. My daughter would say, weather in Boston, because I have a house, because I have money, right? For housing and sustenance in my Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? My lower needs there. So that's always been in charge, and it probably will be in charge for the foreseeable future. And there is always an academic or a thoughtful pursuit of what's the right thing to do, as opposed to what's going to get the code out the door fastest and bring in the most money. And there's a tension between that, because it takes time to do things correctly. And my hot take, and I'm sure I will get blamed for this, but people talk about like, oh, like the enshittification of whatever. And I'm like, but people, like, I've been a product manager. We didn't have meetings where we're like, how can we enshitify this today? Right? So nobody thinks of that. People at, even at hardware companies aren't like, ooh, how can we make this sewing machine all out of plastic so it breaks in 5 years? Nobody. What everybody is responding to is people want features faster. People want machinery cheaper. You want your sewing machine cheaper, you know? You can buy a $50 sewing machine, right? That was probably $500 20 years ago. And it's great. Like, it's more accessible. People want things to be more accessible. And, you talk about like enshittification of like a cell phone. Well, guess what? 5 years from now, my cell phone's not going to have enough memory or storage or whatever to do what I want. So why would you code something that would last more than 5 years? You know you're not going to have to do it. So why would you put the effort into it? It doesn't make you any more money.
Yeah.
So why would you do it, right? The ROI isn't there. And I have 2 more points that I want to make. Well, 3 more actually. David, you said at the very beginning, something along the lines of like managers are in charge and whatever. Productivity, all this extra productivity is not allowing us to work shorter days. We're just getting to the piles of problems. Like there's no end in sight to the amount of problems we can do. One of the things that I've learned after decades, 25 years now, I actually had to up it from 20 to 25 years, which makes me older than graduates at this point, is that it's actually easier for me to close my laptop at 5 p.m. because there's still going to be a mountain of problems. And if I close it at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., there's still a big mountain of problems. It's smaller if I close it at 9 p.m. I've gotten 4 more hours of work. I've done half a day extra work for not extra pay and for more stress and whatever. But it's that mountain of work is always going to be there. So being more productive, yeah, that's great. But it doesn't mean I get to close my laptop at 5 p.m., right? Or, any easier. Because it's not like, oh, my work's done. I'll go home and then maybe tomorrow I'll get different work because I don't know what to do with myself. I could work forever. So that's the other thing. And then in the mid 2000s, I worked for a consulting company, a database consulting company. And one of the people there, Alex Gorbachev, tried to kind of launch a campaign against using the defaults or the industry standards unless you knew that they were the right things to do. And he called it the battle against any guess, right? Because you were like, oh, what's the industry standard for this setting? Let me do this setting. And yeah, that'll work for 80% of the people. But you're not always 80% of the people. And I would go to conferences and stuff and be like, oh, how how Facebook uses MySQL. Like, that's great, but you're not Facebook. You don't need these things. And I'd be doing a talk with and that room would be full, and I'd be doing a talk next door with 12 people in the room about the difference between timestamp and date times and why it's super important. Because if you ever change your system time, half your times will change and half your times won't. Right? That's super important and something probably everybody goes through as they realize oh, we should have put these systems in UTC to begin with. Right? And yet nobody's going to have the level of scale of Facebook, but everybody wants to know that. So yeah, I think all of that ties into the almighty dollar is in charge and always will be in charge.
I just want everyone to notice that Sheeri just hit multiple trigger words that my graduate students and my wife would have said, warning, warning, David's about to engage in a rant. And I didn't. And I simply raised my hand.
You couldn't.
I just want that on the record. Okay?
Sheeri,
you may need to have a trigger warning on this podcast.
I think it actually will show up on the video when you raised your hand, Dave. So I look forward to looking back at that. Yeah,
Sheeri, I must congratulate you. You now have a relationship with David Woods, because until that happens to you, you don't. And now you do.
Is that a good thing? I've earned the badge.
Of course it is. Absolutely.
So but the commentary is essential because people can interpret the things you went through in a bunch of ways that are actually can be a little wrong to terribly wrong.
Really? On the internet? They'll do that?
Yeah. So let's starting with the first one. If my age, I can still remember all the points you made. So I know which ones to rant on. The first one is highlighting that this is one of the fundamental things that started resilience engineering 25 years ago, which is the omnipresent pressure on acute performance criteria that are inevitably narrow and don't cover the full scope of what makes a system viable in the full sense of the word. And so we laid out these things, and the Essentials of Resilience first chapter in 2006 lays this out. The Robust Yet Fragile Theorem lays this out 25 years ago. All of these things point out that everything you said is true and increases the brittleness. So we end up with systems that have, right, that are competent, right, in new ways. Colette's versions of various kinds of competence is excellent. And competence in new ways, yet increasingly brittle, because they're missing the other stuff. Well, what's the other stuff? Well, you described that too. You described the kind of extensibility that you build and the others build in to make the system work, and the confidence, answering Clint's anxiety, that we have a role because of the gaps, holes, and messiness that inevitably reappears and continues along. The snafus are there, and our snafu catching will be essential in a variety of ways. I will have problems to solve tomorrow, right? Even though they're on the agenda today, they will still be there. In fact, they'll probably be further down the priority list tomorrow, right? So why solve them today when I have more important things to do tomorrow? All right. So you've just illustrated, encapsulated this fundamental process of discovery that says, hey, some form of graceful extensibility is an absolute necessity in all systems at all scales, whatever the unit we want to grab and look at, right? And right now, this is primarily comes from people, right? And people have this adaptive capacity, right? With that adaptive capacity comes the variability that we don't like, right? Or the ways we have to embed them in our context to make them more helpful. Oh, we have to pull people and coordinate and integrate them, right? Lauren, we haven't really gotten to Lauren's point, which should be tattooed on everyone, that all modern systems are distributed and layered, and all problems are problems of coordination and synchronization, right? And yes, there are episodes of isolated activity or narrower forms of subsystem activities, but they all matter because they come into this distributed system, and that's where we really need to go next. But first, I have to rant on the second point you made, which was perfectly correct, which is we're always approaching saturation, right? We're always near saturation. All systems today, all roles at all levels have the experience and have adapted to the regular experience of approach to saturation. And we develop a variety of tactics to cope with it. We can talk about some of the basic patterns in those tactics. In the patterns book, I ran through the descriptive 4 that existed before I started 50 years ago almost, and that those aren't the only ones or the best way to describe them, and that's where the messy 9 comes in, right? Where it's capturing, right, in when we think about saturation, lag, and friction, right? Ways that no matter what the plan is, what the expectation for a new capability, how it's going to streamline and make more efficient and therefore more productive and therefore more profitable, so we can take financial resources out of the system, that these things are going to all happen to increase the messiness or reestablish the factors of messiness and therefore re-empower the need for snafu catching, the need for extensibility, the need for adaptive capacity. So the messy 9 is trying to give a simple checklist, a mental checklist kind of thing, a reminder to say, okay, let's think about the way these come into play. Where does congestion arise here? In a sense, you express congestion very clearly. My list is too big for any single day's work, regardless of how long the day is. Okay, your workload is saturated. You have to get into prioritization decisions, etc. Now we also tackle it by reconfiguring, recruiting resources. We do a bunch of different things, all of which are invisible to the people who think they understand and define what work is and how it's supported and resourced. So we're back to the fundamental work as imagined from a distance versus work is practiced under pressure and uncertainty. Now, I want to go back to Colette's comment, because you asked the question inappropriately, Colette.
Okay.
As a good,
How dare you?
I'm sorry, as a good cognitive, as empirical technique, you need to ask it not as with when did AI coding turn out after the fact to have been part of the incident response, right? You want to do it the other way around, or say, okay, how does the fact that you have now started to have a significant infusion of AI generated code in your production system, how does that change how you deal with an anomaly that you don't know where it came from? You don't know the effects that are going on and the indicators don't make sense, because the real issue, right, in this, why I keep saying it's about tempo, time scale, and things, right, in the messy 9, is because as AI generated code infuses more and more production systems, what do we know for sure is going to happen? We know for sure uncertainty will go up. Right?
Yeah.
Uncertainty in incident response will be more intense because you will start having ways. And we can draw analogs like Sheeri has made, we have this stuff before, of course, right? Incident response is a lot about dealing with uncertainty. Anomaly, right? Anomaly response model from 47 years ago, practically, right? Is that people didn't understand the fundamental uncertainty of confronting anomalies. That's why AI Gold Rush 1 algorithms didn't actually work in anomaly response situations. They didn't help, right? Certainly not as a relatively holistic injection of a cognitive partner. They didn't work, right? They could have done some elemental contributions, but no one wanted it to work that way because it wasn't grandiose enough.
It wasn't saving them dollars.
And it didn't serve the needs of the people buying the magic beans.
Actually, the most primary thing in my 50 years of watching technology change has been how much people want to get rid of other people.
We're our domain, the domain of the people
in the business.
The people who are on this call, others are on the call. I mean, myself, a very common thing to say way back in the day when we were all younger, we would say, I can't wait to automate myself out of a job. And what's fascinating and funny about that now is, how did that work out? Well, no, it did not happen. And we whether we knew it as a joke or not, we didn't, because as it turns out, as Sheeri points out, you did a great job of describing the law of stretched systems without saying the law of stretched systems, right? Which is every time there will be more work. And, I will say that, David, I will say that it's a good thing that this community, there's no magic bean buyers or even magic bean believers in this community. What's great about an operational, people who have real, general, almost inescapable contact with all of the messy details, all of the stuff. If there's any community, this is a bit more optimistic here, who is very comfortable and familiar with ambiguity, uncertainty, finding ourselves being responsible for handling a situation that literally no one, including yourself, has any idea of what is happening. That's actually weirdly calming for some of us, because that is a thing that we are familiar with, right? It's actually given the choice between facing a system that has recovered and not having a problem anymore, and we don't know why. That is unnerving way more than everything is broken and we don't know why.
That's why we called this podcast "This Is Fine," for the record.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to mention that. I love that this is what you're
So
speaking
Colette,
about.
I want to give you another kudo besides the 4 forms of competence you referred to, and that is you just put out what is the important thing to look for in the evolution of AI-infused code moving into production, which is what happens when that uncertainty comes into play in an incident, and where there is a struggle because, again, it doesn't matter what the final after action review says about how it all came about, but remember what happened in aviation, which presages everything to a degree that, in fairly interesting ways, what will happen here. Which is eventually there's enough AI infused code that incidents always have problems with AI infused code. Why? Because
Right.
we've generated a lot of AI
Because there's enough of it.
infused
Yeah.
code. And then there's going to be hysteresis in the understanding of incidents and how to respond to them, especially at layers more and more distant from having to actually do incident response, just like in aviation. And where they continually focus on, it's still just a human job of why did you have such a hard time figuring out and solving this before there were outage consequences.
Yeah.
Those people, we have to get better people, or we have to use these new standards, and we have to follow these new rules or whatever, because people, right, just like in aviation to this day, is still focused on too much on, oh, what did the pilot do wrong? There are no incidents where the automation isn't central player to the story. There are no incidents where the interaction of the different parts of the automated suite aren't playing out as part of the story. Yes, it has a human in the story too, because the machines can't do it all, it turns out, as always. And that automation is an order or two of magnitude less complicated than the suite of automation you deal with and the scale of the systems you run. And so you already have stories that are stories of how autonomous systems behaved and misbehaved as things went forward in this, in all of this. And now you've introduced a new form of automation at a new stage of what goes on. And that is going to add to the complexity, to the interdependencies. You just infusing AI technology is inevitable for coding, despite the fact that AI gold rush will end at some point, and it will. When it ends, it will be rather messy, and it will have a big impact on AI coding as well. But adding in this extra layer of interdependency, and then people are going to want to say, oh, we're going to automate you more, not as coders, but as SREs.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, so AI SRE has entered the chat. Like there are companies that are raising rounds that have customers in real life who
Multiple.
So now we're not just talking about LLM generated code, right? Or documentation uncovered by LLM that infuses your architectural or coding decisions. We're talking about then there's a bug introduced into production and suddenly you have an independent agent solve it. There are companies that are doing this, and in some cases the solutioning is, hey, I noticed this problem, I've gone and given you a bunch of documentation, and I've quickly prepped this pull request that I think will resolve the problem. And so the person who is paged for that bug just has to look at the things, say, does this make sense to me, right? Does this seem like and say, okay, or no, this seems off to me, and I'm going to take this information and run with it to solve, right? So those are the examples that I've seen, right, of AI SRE. I have yet to encounter a tool in the AI SRE world I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm sure that they do. In fact, that just does everything without asking an operator.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure there is something there.
But then you can
that
blame the operator. Like when that goes wrong,
Well, of course.
as
Of
David
course.
said, you blame the operator for not saying, hey, how come when you were sleep deprived and hung over at 3 a.m. when you got paged, how come you
Yeah.
didn't recognize this
Well,
very
Yeah.
obvious
wasn't-
thing in hindsight?
I call that
Yeah,
AI
and
junior SRE.
again, my wife says I can't say this, but that's the Woods 1985 paper in AI Gold Rush 1. That
Right.
what trying to mechanize a slice of cognition, right, leads people to think they can automate a holistic range of cognitive functions in real world settings of fundamental uncertainty and change. Messy
But
systems.
Yeah.
some of
with
those cognitive
interdependencies.
systems are messy on their own.
That's right.
Well,
Some of
and
those,
yeah.
some of those things, I remember a couple of times because I had done consulting, I remember finding that, oh, this thing that like caused slowness, it was like, oh, you know what? Check your RAID disks. There's one that's dead. And they were like, what do you mean? Writes aren't
Yeah.
slow. It's reads that are slow. Like there was just some weird thing that I had seen like once or twice before. And I was like, yep, nope, this weird confluence of symptoms is dead RAID disk. I
Feels
didn't
like
have
it
any.
might be that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
But I would go down
Exactly.
the normal, like, oh, if reads are slow and writes aren't, then it's probably not disk. Maybe it's like a memory caching thing, something, or maybe, is there priority between, like, you go down the reasonable paths first. But life isn't like
Yeah.
systems, complex systems aren't reasonable, right? Like we've
Yeah.
been saying this for the last however long,
Yeah.
that without saying it, that AI adds more complexity to these systems.
Right. So I can say for sure to anyone at any time, absolute guarantee that you cannot automate holistically anomaly response. We've
And-
written it,
yeah,
we've
and so
showed
why-
it, we've said the fundamental reasons. You can make a joint system. In fact, the only way you solve it is with joint systems. People need help. Anomaly response is inherently very difficult, as you all
Mhm.
intimately understand firsthand. And you need a bunch of tools and tooling, and you also need collaboration, right, and interaction with others. You need forms of diverse forms of experience. I can't say diverse forms anymore. A multiplicity
a variety of forms.
of forms of experience.
Yes. You'll trigger
And
our NSF grant to
and
go,
how you
Dave.
pull these things together.
Plurality.
And Sheeri just mentioned the difficulties with hypothesis generation. These have been laid out for decades, and so we're trying to reinvent a wheel that is square. It's not going to
Yeah.
roll.
Well,
I
I
think
mean, it's
that's
out
fun.
there. I'm just saying, is anybody here using AI SRE like from any of the incident automation
I've-
folks or?
I've yet to
A
come
little.
across anybody. I've been doing some real searching, and I've yet to come across, and I've come across many people. One person who said it went 0 for 5 before we shut it off. And
That's kind of where
and-
I'm at
and-
with it.
yeah,
Really?
I don't
So
know
has it
anybody
worked
who
ever
has
for
who
you,
has said.
Clint?
Yeah.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
have the thing proposing PRs, but what we do have, and I'm going to call them out because they've really pushed it hard, is Datadog. So Datadog has started to weave AI little suggestions into every little bit of the thing, and I turn them off. Not because I don't want them to work. Like, I definitely would love the help in response. As Dave said, it is hard. If you could get it to connect some dots for you that are, maybe obvious in the data, but aren't in your view of the system in the moment. Like, observability seems like fruitful ground. But right now, it's telling me about anomalies that are obvious and that are easily discarded, and now it's wasting my time, and it's actually making it harder.
This is
It may hit pay dirt once in a while for somebody, but for us, I mean, this is Datadog. It knows about our code deploys. It knows about all the metrics. It knows every single log line we've emitted. I'm like hopeful, maybe someday.
Yeah.
It's going to do it, but right now, what it's going to do is just create as much work as it ever pays off. And so far, it's
this exactly happened in AI Gold Rush 1, right? When it came to anomaly response and trying to take symbolic reasoning algorithms and apply them there. They immediately failed. The explanation will help. And the answer is no, it didn't. It completely failed. And they buried the story because it didn't fit their rhetoric of what it means of the potential of mechanizing cognition. Because if we can mechanize cognition, all these fantasies start to come into play. Instead, all right, so we know exactly what happened, right? And that is it increased data overload. There were nuggets in the churn of inputs generated by the AI advisors in anomaly response, but you didn't have ability to deal with it because you were facing a portion of the messy nine were going on because you've got tempo, you've got conflicts, you've got, all these things going on. And so the ability to deal with a chatty, noisy helper doesn't exist. It wasn't designed to be an effective collaborator in a joint activity space when disruptions arise. They have never, ever tried to design any form of automation that is a collaborative player in a joint activity space when disruptions arise. That's what we need, and it is possible to design these things. But they don't want to spend money on it.
You have, David. I know that you have.
I have successfully.
But you're right.
Real things.
Yeah. So there's some good news
I can show you
here.
again. We can show you in your world. I just said it in a comment on LinkedIn. Oh, yes, this comes up. I can show you how to do representation plus computation to handle that situation about approaching saturation. We did it before in a different world. You can't just transfer what we did there. It was only ever built once. Still runs in Switzerland.
Yeah.
But the
in
same
a nuclear power plant, right?
Yeah,
I thought it was in
France,
France, but yeah.
But the same technique will work. And guess what? I don't need much fucking artificial intelligence.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
It turns out the kinds of I need a little bit of smarts, right? Yeah. But this grandiose, I'm going to substitute for everything. I need some computation that helps me navigate the complexities based on what's actually happening in a way that is highly context sensitive without a top-down computation of context. Yeah. So a context emerges naturally as a dynamic system starts to approach saturation. In fact, a dynamic distributed system where lots of different things can approach saturation and how these things play out. Yeah. Lag is a form, theoretically, lag is saturation in the temporal domain. So all of a sudden we can put these together. Oh, guess what happens when saturation and lag happens? Yeah. Congestion happens. You start, oh, wait a minute. What does congestion do? Lead to saturation. All right. How that plays out. Oh, we're all relying on this asset or resource, and it gets oversubscribed when these various things go down because we didn't size it enough.
Right, Dave. Let me interrupt you and ask you this question because Sheeri described, the invisible hand, right earlier, right of capitalism, sort of pushing folks to invest and make these things real and make them more available. Why do you think that the hand doesn't like your idea? What's happening that's causing capitalism to pull back? And I apologize, John. I know.
Listen, it's you opened the door.
I know. I opened the box.
You're going to have to. Yeah,
I am not going to.
You bought it.
You're making a reasonable argument here. I've had
it's
similar thoughts,
so there's a
technical.
Not as
developed.
No, so there's a technical. I think there's a technical reasons. I don't get into these isms. And it is basically related to pressure and the dominance of a single goal. It's not capitalism. It's a dominance of a single goal, right? A single criteria that emphasizes a relatively short-term perspective on what viability and success is. And whether we're doing healthcare, whether we're doing critical digital infrastructures, it doesn't matter. Viability right? This is all fundamentals in resilience engineering. Viability has a short run component, right? If I'm not competitive and effective now, I don't survive. I'm not viable. But if I am not viable in the long run, I crash, right? Brittleness is a threat to viability in the longer run. That's why biology abhors competent but brittle systems and builds competent and extensible systems. Building extensibility takes resources, but because we have an obsessive compulsive disorder, right? As a society, Anglo-American marketing business management, right, has an obsessive compulsive disorder. That's my diagnosis. Originally a psychologist, not a therapist though. But right, it focuses on a narrow set of criterion obsessively, and that undermines engineering. And so if you look at my on Todd Conklin's thing, I don't know which episode of the podcast, I had it up recently, and I talk about compromise, right? And what's wrong with compromising. Under these pressures, we compromise inappropriately, and systems engineering, safety engineering, right, software engineering all get compromised in ways that have meaningful technical actual outcomes on things that everybody says they don't want to have happen, and they happen, right? And that's why we do the constant litany of they broke, right? Oh, let's look at all the things that it started to break and got fixed, right? The law of fluency, right? Because you fix incidents, people don't see the incidents or see that they were hard or see the risk that represents that is not fully under control or fully understood of what it takes to have it under control. So I come back to, and my efforts today at this stage of my life is to reinforce the foundations, to empower people to know that you don't have to compromise all the time, right? Yes, sometimes you have to compromise, but you got to know when not to, and you got to have ammunition and tools to fight. And that applies, the chief engineering officer for Boeing failed, right, to represent engineering in a trade-off space as conflicts arose, because every conflict was prioritized in the same way. Finances won. 346 people died because the chief engineer could never stand up and say, we're compromising everything for one financial measure. Now, that's part of the organizational failure diagnosis of Boeing killing 346 people in not just one accident, which would have been terrible, but it's even worse that it did it in twin accidents. That it couldn't, and the system couldn't learn between one and stop two. Yeah. That is inexcusable in safety. There is no reason that should ever happen by anybody's approach to safety. And so when we talk about this, we're talking about societies that have become distorted in terms of what they place value on, what they prioritize, right? And their ability to reprioritize and reconfigure when evidence says things should be different is very low. They are, right, not very adaptive, right? They are pursuing one thing, right, with great vigor. And their ability to change course and to change direction, despite real world evidence that this is necessary. It's not subtle evidence. It is evidence that pops up again and again and again. And what's amazing is human ability to discount and rationalize it away when it doesn't fit their model.
All of what Dave is saying is quite clear, is relevant, important, and critical. And I think maybe does warrant more than one episode. I mean, certainly the Messy Nine will get more attention in the future. I will say, as somebody who has been described as having a fault in that I am more optimistic than pessimistic in general, if there's any group or community who has a well-calibrated understanding of what works, what is worth betting on and what is not worth betting on. It is this community. It is the community that responds to incidents. It is the community that has to wake up. We, at some point, we've been used to this. I went like, how long have we been used to this? And Dave, since the year you got your PhD, which is when cron first came into the Unix code base, we've been facing what the fuck is happening since then. And so there's no there's no pulling wool, right? Because an incident at the very least is unambiguous in that shit's broken. And the people who bet and buy magic beans and want to sell magic beans don't wake up and they don't solve them. We do. So I would say that the thing that when the flood, and I genuinely believe metaphorically, when the flood comes and washes most of the horseshit that comes along with the hype, there will be stuff left. And it will be, and that stuff left will be in better shape because people like Martin, people like Sheeri, people like Clint just described at the very first 20 seconds of the episode about what skills they have built to handle doing this stuff effectively because they have expertise. So in the end, I don't worry too much, just as long as how long is it going to take before reality sets in. And so I think when we're prepared for when the flood is washed away and whatever's left will be productive. That's what I think.
Well, two placeholders for down the road. So the first is it's not going to be a flood. It's going to be a drought. And the reason is because the financial model for AI doesn't exist. It's a fiction. Everything you pay a higher rate for using AI algorithms than most people do, but you are still heavily subsidized. And when the organizations have to pay full freight for this, and society decides there's going to be an interesting societal level dilemma when OpenAI fails. And because they have no revenue stream to balance the costs of all this. And so something's going to happen because of the instability. And the scenario I would like to hear about is ones I've heard already where people have said, I ran out of tokens. I had to stop working. And it was only 1:00. We had so much work to do, right? And to do it, I've gotten in the habit of using AI, and I ran out of budget that day and went home. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what happens or they were, making it dramatic to be short. But the point is holds, which is finite resources will strike. This early period of experimental technology where all the resources flow to it and ends. It always ends. And the transition path here is absolutely unknown. And everything everybody claims about it is utter nonsense, even though we know something will happen. And when they look back, they will justify the ones who they will claim understood the actual path in hindsight when nobody, in fact, had any idea what was going on. So it's an enormously unstable situation. And there's a question, it's probably not for this or even the next podcast, but at some point in the next year, probably, maybe, certainly in 2026, we'll probably need to hit on this topic of, as the gold rush starts to end, what happens to places where the algorithms are in fact useful in a way, but not so dominantly useful as to produce productivity that justifies the high cost. And that's why we say algorithms, that if you lead with algorithms that make you safe and effective, or effective and safe, and then worry about productivity, you will develop and use new algorithms effectively. But that's not a gold rush. It's not going to have a big payoff, but it will make a safer and a more effective system, which will produce productivity and economic benefits down the road. But you have to lead with effective and safe first. And so hitting this, the cliffs of AI, and what's going to happen when we hit the cliffs, because, right. And another cliff is data. So you guys all said, wait a minute, what happens when so much code is AI generated? How are you going to know how anything really works anymore? Where are we going to get the data by which AI algorithms work better at coding? Because you have, at the scale of production level systems, the experience and knowledge, which would be the data from which you would train the AI algorithms, not simply the rules of coding. And this gets us to the placeholder that was in the chat that Sheeri responded to, that we really, really need to address the gap and the difference between just generating code and really doing software ops of critical infrastructure. And people really deeply don't understand that. They haven't since I met you guys 10 years ago. And I recognized very quickly a real complex operational world, and that you presented both a picture of the future and a version of the old confusions that distant views have, that create fantastical versions of work as imagined. And so we've got to somehow, somewhere, and maybe the podcast isn't it, but we've got to make clear to a wider audience that why this is so different. And I know we've been trying. John famously used the picture of trying to repair a car while it's on two wheels, driving on fast on a dirt road in a deconstructed environment with repair people hanging on for dear life.
Yeah.
Didn't help. Didn't work. It was good. But I mean, the fundamental misunderstanding is out there. So those are two. I'm sure I can. I know.
It's
stop.
fine.
I want to give
Dave.
you more.
It's fine. It's fine, right? It's all fine. This is fine. What's happening?
This is
now.
fine. That's why
Dave, we need to have many coffees and stay up late into the night talking about so many things.
Can it be?
It's true.
Can it be cocktails or wine or
whatever vice? It can be chocolate. Whatever is your vice. That's. I mean, if I have wine, I'll fall asleep.
I want to say a big thank you to everybody that showed up for us today. Dave Woods, John Allspaw, Sheeri Cabral, Martin Smith, and of course Clint Byram, who is my always companion in figuring all of this stuff out. I really appreciate you. We're going to try to do a live event. We'll probably have different other phases of this talk. But thank you so much for having it today. And we'll see you soon.
Good luck, Ed.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's been great. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you.
And